me and hurt me. And so can I just tell you, it is bad advice when you sit down with somebody and they say, just forgive and forget. It's not reality. And my guess is you've tried to do that and can't, so therefore what? You walk away and go, I can't do this. I can't do this. For some of us, we think that forgiving is pretending like it didn't happen. We find every closet we can to stuff it in, or we lift rugs and try to brush it under, because if we wish hard enough that it didn't happen, then maybe it didn't happen. Guys, you can't wish it away. What happened back here, and I don't know what your situation is, and it may be something really severe and drastic, or it may be something that's really kind of insignificant in the grand scheme of life. And whatever happened back here, you can't wish that away. You can't pretend. But some of us have convinced ourselves, as long as we don't look at it, as long as we act like it's not in the room and pretend that it's not there, then it's not there. And can I tell you, that's not forgiveness. Forgiveness isn't a feeling. See, I think for some of us, we need to feel everything. And so can I say, it has nothing to do with how you feel. Because it's an intentional, and we're going to see this today. It is an intentional action or decision you make. It's not a feeling. But for some of us, we think, well, I don't feel good about it, or it doesn't feel right. And again, it kind of goes back to that forgetting. We say, well, I can't forgive, and what it means is I won't forgive because it doesn't feel right. I feel hurt, I feel betrayed, but you can't feel forgiveness. I think a couple more. I just want to run through these quick. Again, forgiveness isn't conditional. I think sometimes we feel like that in order for forgiveness to really happen, there's conditions. This is the, well, first, I'm going to wait and see. I'm going to wait and see if they really mean it. And so what we end up doing in order to really exercise forgiveness, we just watch. Because I'm watching the minute you do something that I don't feel like your apology or your ask for forgiveness was legit, you know what? Then it's back on. See, we put conditions around it. I'll forgive you if, and you fill in your own blank. If you promise to never do it again, if you promise to never come around, if you promise to leave her alone, I'll forgive you. And we create these lists of conditions. And can I tell you, forgiveness isn't conditioning. Forgiveness isn't you waiting for an apology. Well, I'm ready to forgive. I'd be more than happy to forgive if they would just ask for an apology. And can I tell you that in the spirit of what Paul's talking about that we're going to see today, it's not that. Sometimes you've got to take the initiation of the first step. And it may or may not come with an apology. But can I tell you that it's not dependent on an apology? It doesn't mean that in order for you to forgive something that someone has to come and ask you to forgive it. And I think that's key, that's important. I want you to know this, that forgiveness is not a one-time event. Kind of, again, going back to that forgiving and forgetting. You know what? You are going to remember things. And so guess what? You're going to have to exercise forgiving over and over and over. Forgiveness is going to take effort. It's a lengthy process. And like I told you, it's hard. And here's the point, that we want to gradually restore the relationship. And even if we don't restore the relationship with a person, wouldn't it be nice to restore the relationship with you and God, or to restore even your own relationship with yourself with some inner peace that could come from this? And so can I tell you, it's not a one-time event. It isn't rebuilt overnight. It's going to take you tackling every moment and every minute and every reminder and exercising it over and over and over. Can I tell you this, that forgiveness isn't you condoning wrong. Again, I think we get trapped in this and we think, well, if I forgive, then they think that what they did was okay. It has nothing to do with you condoning the action. See, you're not saying that what you did was okay. What you're saying is what you did doesn't own me. It doesn't mean that you should continue to let wrong happen to you over and over and over. See, forgiveness doesn't mean that we turn the criminal loose. So when people hurt us, we've got to get to this place where we go, you know what? I'm not going to condone, but I'm also not going to let you own. Forgiveness isn't losing, guys. We live in a win culture right now, don't we? It's all about winning. It's not about being right. It's not about the other person. It's just about winning. Well, can I ask you something? What are you currently winning right now by holding on to this stuff? If it's all about winning, I just want to ask, for those of you who are harboring some deep-seated issues with people or past or things or circumstances that you just haven't let go of and are seemingly unable to forgive, let me ask, what are you winning right now? So it's not about winning and losing. Can I tell you that forgiveness isn't about weakness? I think for some of us, we go, well, if I forgive, then you know what? They're just going to step all over me and I'll just become a doormat and I'm not going to look weak this time. And you have convinced yourself that holding on to whatever it is you're holding on to makes you strong. Can I just tell you that it takes strength to forgive? It's weak people who can't forgive. It's weak people who can't move on. It's weak people who can't find a way to let go. But it takes true strength. It takes some real courage to be able to truly forgive somebody. Forgiveness isn't figuring out why you're hurt. See, I think sometimes we get bogged down in that, right? Well, if I can understand why they hurt me, then I'll be able to forgive. And we want to know everything about it and what they were thinking and why they did it and why, and can I just tell you again, if that's what is the missing piece to your forgiveness, chances are you'll never get that, so it can't be that. Here's a big one. Forgiveness isn't suddenly liking the person. Again, I've sat down across the table from people and had coffee and they're like, yeah, I can forgive, but I'm going to tell you, I don't want anything to do with them anymore. I'm not liking them. And I'm going, good, don't. Nobody said you had to like the person. See, guys, we're called to love everyone, but that doesn't mean that, you know what, we got to be best friends. It doesn't even mean that we've got to continue in the toxicity of the relationship. It just means that, you know what, I got to get this out. I got to move on with this. But that doesn't mean that you got to suddenly like the person. Let me give you two more. Forgiveness isn't impossible. See, again, running through this list, you're going, I just can't. It's not possible. And the person may be dead. I don't know. But you have probably built some sort of barrier or wall that says, I'm not even for sure at this stage because it's been 10 years. It's impossible, Jason. Can I tell you, it's not impossible. And you're going to see that this morning. And then finally, it's not optional. It's not optional. If we claim Jesus and we make him Lord of our life and we say that going forward, Jesus, I'm going to be like you, it's not optional. And that's what my dad pointed out when I was in 5th grade, sitting on the edge of my bed, dealing with anger that I had never felt before, but anger that, guess what, has not gone away because I've had 100 other situations that has caused similar anger. When my dad looked back and said, don't be you, be Jesus. It's not optional. So back to Ephesians, maybe some of this will make a little better sense now. Paul begins, he says, let me tell you about the presence and the power of Christ, what he can do. Verse 31, he says, get rid of all bitterness, rage, anger, brawling, slander, along with every form of malice. He says, here's what I want you to do. Ever how you're feeling, and if it's not described in one of those words, then that you fit into all forms of, whatever that is, whatever has rushed back into you all of a sudden. Here's what Paul says. He says, get rid of it. Get rid of it. See, the original language here, here's what it means. It means that you have anger in your fist, and you release it. And some of you have held tight to the fist, white knuckle, you have held on to it for a long time. And Paul comes in and says, get rid of it. Get rid of it. It says, I'm gonna remove it, I'm gonna let it go. I'm gonna let it go. And I want you to know that this can only come from God. It's that kind of release. And you'll see that in a second. It's that kind of release. Another way of looking at this, and I love this description, it's like walking through a spider web. Lori and I were hiking a while back, and you just kind of, anybody, you know what I'm talking about? You walk through a spider web that you didn't see. And so Lori turns around and she's like, dude, you okay? And I'm like, actually, she would never use the word dude, but she's like, hey, you okay? And I'm like this, it's like, and it's like you just, you know what I'm talking about? You spend the next 5 minutes doing what? Touching places that the spider web didn't even touch because you feel like it's on you. And you've got to do what? You've got to get it off. You've got to get rid of it. And so it's like, is it here? I mean, where? And it's that same kind of picture. When Paul says get rid of it, he says get rid of everything that feels like it. Whether it's the real spider web, he says get rid of the web. Get it out of your mouth, get it out, get it off of you. And this is the point in the morning when you look at me and go, Jason, all this sounds good, but how? How? Again, keep reading. He says, after he says, get rid of these things, he says, be kind and compassionate to one another, forgiving each other. Be kind and compassionate and forgiving each other. He says, in contrast to the bitterness and the brawling, he says, extend kindness and extend compassion. And then there's a comma there, and then there's the big word, forgiving each other. Paul says, you want to get rid of the bitterness. You want to get rid of this hostility. You want to get out of the cell, the prison cell that this thing has built. You want to get out of the resentment. You want to get out of the frustration. You want to get out of the anger. He says, try kindness on. Find a way to be kind. Find a way to be compassionate. He says, shed those webs. And forgiveness is what is going to enable us to shed those things. The spirit of forgiveness and this willingness to be kind and compassionate to someone who has been anything but kind and compassionate. Now, if we stopped right here, I know this. If we stopped right here, we'd sidestep this. Or better yet, if we stopped right here, you could justify not doing those things because you have a well-rehearsed story that you've used over and over and over and over. You have a list of excuses as to why you can't do that. And I get it, guys. Some of these are deep-seated. Can I tell you that some of these things in my life has cost me a lot of money and a lot of counseling? Because I could sidestep it and I could excuse it and I could justify my current attitude and my current actions based on something that happened back there. If it stopped right there, you would say, listen, that all sounds good, but, and you would shoot into a well-rehearsed story about why you can't and why you shouldn't and why you won't. And thank God Paul doesn't end there. Paul's going to throw two big words at us that changes the narrative of this. Keep reading. He says, verse 32, be kind and compassionate to one another, forgiving each other, and here it is, just as. Can we say that together? Even if you're at home, say it. Just as in Christ God forgave you. And this is the showstopper. Paul says, take your well-rehearsed story, take your excuses why you can't, and why you shouldn't, and why you won't, and do as Jesus would do. Better yet, he says, do as Jesus has done. So what's going to enable you to be able to forgive? Forgiveness. You go, how's that? Does that even work in a sentence? You're going to be able to forgive because of forgiveness. But it's not just any type of forgiveness. It's a God type of forgiveness. It's a divine forgiveness. It's a Jesus type. You go, okay, well, what's that? And Jesus clarifies this in a story. I'm not going to read this story to you, but I want to close with the story. In Matthew chapter 18, Jesus is asked a question. In fact, verse 21, Peter, who I love, Peter just, I think, is me in a lot of ways. Peter comes and says, hey, Jesus, how many times should I forgive a brother or sister who has done something wrong to me? 7 times? He says up to 7 times. And can I just stop right there and say that if you don't know anything about Peter, this is significant because this shows growth in Peter. If you knew Peter before Jesus, Peter wouldn't have gotten to 2 times. See, Peter thinks he's being really gracious in this moment when he talks to Jesus. Hey, Jesus, I just want you to know I've really grown since I've been following you. I've watched how you deal with people. Now, before I wouldn't even ask the question. I'd be pulling him off the monkey bars. But I'm trying to change, Jesus. So how's 7 sound? I mean, that's generous, right? And everybody else, he's wanting to look, hey guys, I'm willing to forgive 7 times. I know you ain't, John. I know your problems. And he thinks he's got, I'm going to impress Jesus with this. 7 times, Jesus. I'm going to tell you, I'm a true disciple. And I love what Jesus says. He says, oh, no, not 7. He says, how about 77? And this is the point where Peter's like, hold up, I'm already at 6, Jesus. Or there's another place that Jesus talks about this and he says 70 times 7, right? And before you do the math, here's what Jesus is saying in this moment. Jesus is saying in this moment, it's limitless. And what he also points out to Peter is that, listen, you're starting from the wrong place. It's the wrong source. Read it again. He says, Jesus, how many times should I forgive someone? See, and the key word there is I. Peter says, I want to know how many times I'm required, or how many times I've got to, on my own will and on my own strength and my own motives, all these, how many times should I forgive? See, rephrasing this makes all the difference. That's why I wanted to link these two stories. Paul says, just as in who? Jesus. And so rephrasing it, when Peter comes and says, how many times should I forgive you? Here's what Jesus is going to say, just as I forgave you. So he really should rephrase the question, but we don't rephrase the question because we don't like the answer. What Peter should have said is, Jesus, how many times would you forgive someone? Not how many times am I required? How many times should I? What Peter should have said is, Jesus, I'm just curious, in your teaching and in your moving about and dealing with relationships, how many times would you forgive someone? And again, we don't do that because we don't like the answer. See, I think in the moment when Jesus said, well, 70 times 7, this is the moment when Jesus, come on, Jesus, you're crazy. You're crazy. I'm not doing that. I don't have it within me. And he goes, you're absolutely right. You don't have it within you. That's why I'm going to model something for you. I'm going to do something. And so the thing is, then you do just as I have done. And I love Jesus because Jesus always takes things to the simplest form. Jesus sees the confusion on Peter's face and he says, okay, let me take the mystery out of this, Peter. Let me tell you another story. He says there was a king. He said, and the king, he's the king, right? He can do whatever he wants and he can demand whatever he wants. And he goes to settle up his debts with people. And he says there was a guy who owed him 10,000 bags of gold. I don't know what that means. I don't know if that's $1 million. I don't know if that's $2 million. Here's what it means. It means it was an unpayable debt. There was no way in this guy's lifetime that he was going to be able to repay this debt. And so here's what happens in the moment that the king comes and says, hey, you owe me 10,000. He just falls and he says, I need mercy, have mercy. The text says that he begs for mercy from the king. You know what the king does? The king says, I show pity. And the text says, I'm going to let it go. I'm going to cancel it. I'm not going to postpone it. I'm not going to lessen it. I tell you what, I know you can't do 10,000 bags of gold, so I tell you what, why don't we settle for 1,000 bags? So it says he just lets it go. And this is the part of the story where it gets personal, right? Because this is where you and I come in. That guy leaves that situation where he has just been forgiven, canceled, let go of 10,000 bags of gold. And he walks out of the presence of a gracious king. And he walks out of the presence of a forgiving king. And he goes straight home and acts a fool. He goes straight home and finds a neighbor who owed him a few pieces of silver. And the text says that he confronts him and he chokes him. Now, by the way, the king never laid a hand on the guy. And now the scene is he has this guy pulled off the monkey bars and choking him on the playground dirt. And this is the point of the story, I believe, where everybody gasps and goes, no. It's not right. This is outrageous. And as the father, the king does, hears about this story. And so he bears down, he comes and he gets I can't imagine the conversation, but it was the moment where he says, what are you thinking? How could you go after a few pieces of silver when I forgave 10,000 bags of gold? And I wonder how many of us have been forgiven 10,000 bags of gold, but we continue to choke people for a few pieces of silver. Or better yet, life is being choked out of you because you can't let go of a few pieces of silver. And here's the zinger to the story. And this is what I want to point us to. When I said a minute ago, it's not optional, listen to the zinger. He looks Peter in the eyes, Jesus does, and he says, I want you to make sure we're tuned in right here. Verse 35. This, talking about the bearing down that God did, the king did after he found out how unforgiving. He says, this is how the Heavenly Father will treat you unless you forgive your brother and sister from the heart. Jesus' words in this moment, guys, couldn't be any clearer. Here's what he says. Cancel the debt, forgive them, or else. Because I don't know what the for else might include, but I know this, I want no part of it. I know it doesn't sound good. And you go, well, Jason, this seems really severe. That God would do to me what? I mean, isn't God supposed to be bigger than me? Better than me? Yes. See, Jesus is serving a warning here. And I think the warning is severe because the consequences of not doing it is severe. Let me say that again. I think that Jesus says, I'm going to give you a really severe warning on not forgiving people because you not forgiving people has really severe consequences. Can we agree to that? Some of that emotion that you felt this morning surrounding a situation, guys, that's severe, right? I've seen unforgiven issues last decades. I've seen it go farther than that. Unforgiven stuff can be so severe that it begins to be multi-generational. All you do is pass your crap down onto your kids or whoever's next. The future relationship, it's severe. And Jesus says, listen, I need you to tune in. This is a severe moment. So we've got to learn to have this sort of limitless grace, this kind of grace, this forgiveness that involves an immense amount of self-sacrifice. Grace that causes us to surrender my desires for revenge and vengeance, payback and punishment, where we get to a place where we can offer this sort of grace and this sort of forgiveness free. I love what Andy Stanley says. He says that in the shadow of my hurt, forgiveness feels like a decision to reward my enemy. But in the shadow of the cross, forgiveness is merely a gift from one undeserved